Hello everybody, I'm about to sound like a broken record. I did not upload or post the poll for people to vote on what topic I should be responding to, which is a genuine, sincere disappointment because I actually like those polls. I like looking at the result and things like that. But, and this is where the broken record thing really appears, it's because of my schedule. At some point, I want to make a video for the main channel. There's a little benefit you Patreons get. I sometimes talk about my ideas for the main channel. I want to make a video about basically the danger of applying labels too readily, and especially the risk that in applying labels, it could become like an excuse, basically. The obvious example there would be people who use mental health issues as an excuse for things that they get wrong. For example, like on Twitter now, I'm often seeing things about like how people with ADHD can't do things, people with social anxiety can't do things, people with autism can't do things, and every single time it comes across like, you know, people making an excuse. I remember like the most recent example was there was someone who said basically if you have autism, then you might accidentally cheat on your partner because you won't realize the implications of being in a relationship or something like that. And of course, the appropriate response that was being given by a lot of people is shut up, take accountability for what you're doing, take accountability for your actions, you nincompoop. So with all that said, I'm about to be a bit of a hypocrite. This is my mustache t-shirt, even though I don't have a mustache. I'm going to be a bit of a hypocrite and say that I genuinely do think I must have some kind of ADHD, which is why I need to stick to a schedule. Because if I do not have a schedule, small things, little things, but important things just go completely below the radar. While my Patreon's very important, you guys are very important, what you do is very important and very appreciated. Making that poll is a very small thing, so there's a very substantial risk that if I do not have a specific thing that I am consulting saying, all right, now is the time when you make that poll, I'm not going to make the poll, and I completely forgot it. The big difference is that I'm not saying like, oh, you know, I think again, I don't really know what the definition of ADHD is, but it seems like it must be some kind of ADHD thing that I just completely forget important but small things, as in things that, you know, wouldn't take up much of the day, but are just things that you kind of need to remember to do unless I have a very strict schedule. But yeah, the message there, of course, is not, hey, you know, basically that's my excuse and you all just have to accept it. No, the real situation there is, of course, I need to be even more committed to my schedule. And I am. The thing is, it's just a few things were off over the weekend. I went to see my grandma because it was her birthday. It was my wedding anniversary. And also England were playing in the final. So those are three things that are different and unique. Unfortunately, of course, the weekend is when I aim to make that post. And the weekend is also when I am doing things. So I don't know, which, and again, little things like that are likely to be the kind of things that make me go down that dangerous path of saying, well, you know, I've done so many kind of unexpected things, my schedule's already so off, I can just ignore my schedule, and that's the danger. Even if something happens during the day where something takes longer than I thought it was, or there's something that happens I didn't even realize was going to happen, I can at least go and be like, okay, well, what should I have been doing there? And what of the things I should have been doing was really important? And then I could be like, oh, I was supposed to do the Patreon poll. I'll do that now. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, with all that said, today I had to kind of make up what we're doing because I did not have the poll to consult, which again is so sad. I love seeing the poll, like what you guys are interested in. It's like a little mini election, but not an election where I'm ever going to find the result horrendously depressing like I did with our recent general election in the UK. So with that said, I think I went for the obvious choice. This was, I think, ranked second in the recent poll. It's something I began responding to already. There's lots of reasons for me to be responding to this. The cast report is Pseudoscientific Trash by Vaush. So, yeah, I think this makes sense as a thing to respond to, but of course, I think maybe if I had put it to a poll, maybe this is what you guys would have voted for. Having said that, I feel like maybe not. Maybe you guys are all tired of the cast report. The problem is I couldn't just guess at what else you would have responded to. Again, it's my fault. And I genuinely feel like a ninny for not having sorted it out. But we're going to let Vaush play. We're going to hear what he has to say. And we're going to, just see. And I hope you enjoy it, even though you didn't vote for it. And again, my failure. And yeah, again, to clarify, even if I'm saying like, oh, it is some kind of like mental thing, like something that could technically be diagnosed, that I just totally forget these things. I'm not saying that as an excuse because, even if that was the case, I just need to, manage it and get on top of it. That's basically, and that would be the conclusion to that video I was talking about making. Like, it doesn't really, like, even if you get diagnosed with some kind of a label, that's never like an excuse. And of course that relates to things like gender dysphoria as well. Like, even if you're diagnosed with, hey, you are a biological male who wants to be a woman, well, that doesn't mean you need to let that define you.
There is no future for the United Kingdom. Stonewall...
Well, I'd like to disagree, but we did have that recent election result.
Which talks about context, something this channel loves very, very much. And overview of key findings.
Sorry, is he like just saying that because he thinks, like, because of, he thinks that the context is very important for the things that he's done? Because if so, that's really funny. Like, that reference, like, context, I like very much, because I know his whole thing was like, with all the times he's said, well, pedo stuff, let's be honest, that's what it is, pedo stuff, that he was just taken out of context. I don't know.
Damn, sounds like a problem with the NHS being like torn apart and privatized then. Don't see
True.
How that's an issue with trans people.
Well, it's not, but like, because the NHS has no money, that means that you have to consider things within that context. Like, yeah.
Remember how a lot of the fear-mongering in the UK about trans youth was a rise in the number of trans men? Clinicians also noted...
So yeah, but like... What's wrong with that? Again, essentially what that was saying is because, so again, I don't know if I can like show him reading out the whole thing. Basically, he just read a bit of the paragraph that basically said, because there's been a change in the types of people seeking these services, it's worth doing a review on these services because these services were originally intended for very different people. Basically, it used to be for biological males almost entirely, and now it's a different situation. It's actually a lot of biological females seeking the service. So, considering it's therefore quite likely a different phenomenon, we should look into this and maybe see whether or not what we originally thought for the original state of affairs should be different now.
They were having to manage alongside their gender-related distress. Sorry, I'm going to use that tone of voice whenever we come across a euphemism that carefully avoids validating the existence of trans people.
What do you think it should be? First of all, fuck. I don't usually swear, but it pisses me off so much that he is absolutely obsessed with this idea that it's completely inconceivable that anyone would dare not affirm trans people. Why should we affirm the identity of trans people? He's such a twat. He's such a twat. Like, again, just imagine how annoying it would be. I know, see, the thing is, Vaush, if anything, he kind of seems like he's got the vibe of a smarmy atheist, but I'll make the analogy to a Christian. Imagine if there was a Christian who did videos like Vaush, responding to people, and they felt a need to point out every single time, I just gonna put on this tone of voice every single time they carefully go out of their way to admit that God exists. You'd be like, shut up, you complete twat. That's the only word for it. Because not everyone believes in your claim that in many people's eyes you have not sufficiently evidenced. In the case of trans identity, I don't think that's been sufficiently evidenced. But that's point one. So point one, you have not made any argument for your position, right? Let's not forget, I debated Vaush, and while I don't think the debate went well, the only argument he could make was essentially that he thought that there was a moral problem with what I was saying. He wasn't arguing that it is clearly factually true that trans-identified males are women. And by the way, that moral argument, many trans-identified activists, or many trans activists who are themselves actually trans-identified, don't like that argument. I know ContraPoints has said before, I don't want people to just affirm my identity because it's polite, and because they don't want to hurt my feelings. I want them to actually think that I am a woman. So Vaush hasn't made an argument for this. The other thing here is, what's wrong with saying gender-related distress? It is distress related to gender. I don't see what the issue is there. I think you could maybe say sometimes it's not necessarily gender-related distress, it's kind of sex-related distress, but I suppose maybe you could say, insofar as we'd then be talking about the psychological assessment of one's sex, if we're talking about sex-related distress, you could say, well, it is necessarily, therefore, by extension, gender-related as well.
The independent review set out to understand the reasons for the growth in referrals and the change in case...
Just on the side, obviously the other thing is, this is so poisoning the well. Like, he's clearly so ready to be like anything that he can find in terms of how this is worded. And in general, I hate this whole wording thing. The main thing I remember it always annoying me with was abortion, right? Where it's like, half the time, people spend almost no time actually arguing around the topic itself, and they're just obsessed with what words is someone using. Does someone say baby to refer to a fetus? Oh no, you got to freak out about that. Does someone say like women's bodily autonomy? And it's like, and that's the thing. Like, there's so many arguments where it's like somebody just says a phrasing of things that makes sense from their perspective, and someone else comes and say, don't you mean, like someone says that, it's important to marry women's bodily autonomy with, concerns around the life of the fetus or whatever. And someone's like, don't you mean it's important to marry women's rights to murder with the life of the baby or whatever? But then at the same time, it goes the other way. Like, I'm not saying, like, pro-choicers do that too. Like, pro-choicers are massive twats about wording as well. It's like, just accept the fact that people who have different opinions from you are going to word things differently. And also, definitely accept the fact that some people will intentionally word things in neutral sounding ways because they want to be neutral in the way they present things. And in that case, it's even more annoying. Like, I can kind of understand being annoyed if someone's wording things in a way that specifically disagrees with your position. But when they're just sounding neutral, and again, to be so obsessed with this shows a complete lack of interest in the actual arguments. Like, if I wasn't doing this for the entertainment value in terms of making this video, I would just like stop watching it, because it's like, well, and the same, if anyone starts off a video by just being like, oh, let me just obsess over the wording and the exact way somebody's phrasing this, ridiculous.
The review commissioned the University of York to conduct a series of independent systemic...
That's my alma mater.
Review. Broad agreement that it is the result of a complex interplay between biological, psychological, and social factors. This balance of factors will be different in every individual. That
seems like something that no one could possibly disagree with. I wonder if he's just going to say it like that. The main criticism I have of that is it seems quite an insubstantial thing to say.
Gender questioning young people, despite their presentation being similar.
What do you think they should say? That they're questioning their gender? It's gonna continue to annoy me every single time. Like, what the hell do you think they should be saying? Whatever.
Some clinicians fearful of working with gender questioning young people. Are they not in a gender clinic? Would that not be what they're there for? Too vague to say.
The issue is that there are expectations around what happens in these clinics that means some people might be concerned because they recognize the magnitude of what's happening here. Which, yeah, like, if I personally was in charge of a clinic, and let's say I even, like, on some level believe in this trans identity stuff, just the magnitude, the stakes of what's going on here, where it's either, this person sincerely is trans and by denying their identity you're seriously harming them, or they're not actually, and you're potentially setting them down a really negative route by giving them these life-changing medical interventions. It makes sense to be fearful of that, just in terms of not knowing what to do. So the fact that this person's working in this job and can expect to meet gender questioning young people does not. And by the way, the issue isn't really that they're gender questioning. Lots of people are gender questioning. It's still not surprising. They'd be like, well, I'm a bit confused about how to handle this situation.
Say anything about. An appraisal of international guidelines for care and treatment of children and young people with gender incongruence.
What is your problem? Am I gonna do this every single time? I don't know. Every single time it will annoy me.
Found that no single guideline could be applied to its entirety in the NHS in England.
Okay, here's the issue I have with this, okay? One of his main, I'm back on the gender incongruence thing. One of his main issues is that, essentially, I guess, by using these terms, instead of, I guess, saying, like, what, trans identity, transgender, things like that, that's his issue. That's what he'd prefer them to be saying, because he's saying, oh, they're not recognizing their identity. The problem is, what they're talking about here is specifically a situation where the actual trans identity of this person is in dispute. From Vaush's perspective, the way Vaush is arguing here is basically almost seemingly taking it for granted that these trans identities are valid. And that's why it's a problem that they're using this language that doesn't automatically validate this trans identity. But if that was the case, then the entire report would be pointless. The point of the report is, how do you handle this, considering, well, in part this is the point of the report, considering the ambiguity in light of, detransitioners and things like that some of these people might not actually be trans. So within that context, talking about gender incongruence and questioning gender, these are appropriate ways to describe a situation where somebody might be trans, but they also might not be. So what even is, like, Vaush's objection only makes sense here in that he seems to object to the idea of not just using the word like, this person has a completely valid trans identity, if his assumption is that every single person who goes to a gender clinic must necessarily automatically have a completely valid trans identity. And if that's his attitude, then this whole thing is just ridiculous. Because it's like, well, I guess at that point, he thinks there shouldn't even be any process of establishing what's actually best for this child and what situation this child is going through. So yeah, just an idiot.
Meta-analysis, 51 studies that improve, 4 that have null or mixed findings. The evidence on this is overwhelming. Like, we conduct plenty of medical practices on shadier and less consistent.
Okay, so I don't really care. Basically, there he's going through like the whole, we've got studies that show that this is correct. Okay, first of all, let's just bring it back to the fact that trans identity is a claim about reality. We do not base claims about reality on whether or not they are beneficial to people's health. We just don't. We don't say that gravity doesn't exist because some people are scared of heights. So that's point one. But the other issue here, as always, is that he's saying, we have other practices that we based on this evidence. Well, partially that's because in other cases, it's obvious there is a medical problem, right? So you don't need that many studies for, let's say, a cancer drug in order to show, hey, we should probably use this, because if you just kind of show, hey, it seems to have an improved effect, well, that's probably enough, because we know cancer is a serious issue. So, of course, if there's something which shows a lot of evidence, yeah, people are probably going to start using that, and there doesn't have to be many studies, whereas, maybe there has to be over 50, up to 100 studies on trans identity, and people can still be suspicious about it, because it's not as simple of an issue. It's not as clear what the problem is. It's pretty clear that talking therapy is not going to cure cancer. It's pretty clear that changing the way our society operates on a much more macroscopic level is not going to cure cancer. Although, again, I would say, of course, we should be doing things like pedestrianizing certain areas in order to reduce things like air pollution and stuff like that, which would reduce cancer. But, that's kind of a separate issue because, of course, people will still get cancer, obviously, and will still have to deal with that in a pretty obvious way. But with trans identity and any mental health issue, there's so many more questions about what's the best way to deal with it, because it's not as simple and as objective as a physical ailment. I mean, how many studies have there been into, the fact that you should put a cast around a broken bone? You probably don't need that many, because it's pretty obvious on a surface level. Well, the bone's broken, it's probably going to wobble around in a way that's not very good, so let's put something around it, something hard and solid, to hold it in place. You don't need many studies around that, do you? Whereas, how do we deal with this person who has, any of these, crazy mental health issues going on? That is an open question. And whether or not we should medicalize it is certainly an open question. So yeah, that whole argument there, it's a complete false equivalency to say, well, there are other medical treatments that have less evidence for them than the affirmation approach to dealing with, trans identity as a medical issue. It's not a good argument.
To achieve for individuals seeking support from NHS Gender Services. Non-statement. Notice how all of these so far are basically just like, none of these statements are I know this is the key findings.
At several points now he said this is a non-statement, stuff like that. I agree. A lot of the statements he's been dealing with, they're basically just saying this is the thing that's happening and it's for reasons that relate to complex factors. Like a long way of saying essentially nothing. And that is actually what the majority of these points have been. So it's kind of, fun to make some progress through the video based on the fact a lot of this stuff has been insubstantial. But that's kind of my problem with the CAS report in general from what I've seen. Like, I don't think you can say anything... one of the problems with the CAS report is, despite the fact that these people have completely freaked out about it, it's nowhere near controversial enough. And the fact it hasn't caused that, the level of controversy, the level of controversy it would need to cause in order to be substantial Vaush would have to have an aneurysm. Because, never mind, bear in mind Vaush is freaking out about the fact that they've used completely neutral language in a context where it's obviously entirely appropriate to use neutral language because it's talking about a situation we don't really know what's happening. I honestly would only be interested in any report that pretty much starts off with the conclusion that, or, with the premise, I guess, that a biological male can't be a woman. Unless it's specifically about that question of can a biological male be a woman. But as far as a medical thing is concerned, we need to start off by saying, all right, what is this about? Essentially, it's a question of should we pretend that these identities are valid, right? That's needs to be understood as the question. The CAS report doesn't seem to have made any really solid recommendations, apart from the ban on puberty blockers, which is obvious because, a lot of these puberty blockers were only ever in the first place medically approved for situations that essentially have nothing to do with actually delaying puberty. They just have that side effect. And of course, with that said, the other side effects they have are very dangerous. Puberty blockers, of course, nonsense, but it hasn't made that many really substantial recommendations. And it seems to be a lot of it is insubstantial, nothing statements, which is disappointing.
The effect on cognitive and psychosexual development remains unknown. Incorrect. There are studies on puberty blockers. I don't... What does that mean?
What do you mean? So just because there's studies on something doesn't mean it's unclear. How long have we actually been using puberty blockers for? I feel like it can't be more than a few, years, really. I don't remember this whole puberty blockers thing being super common a decade ago.
The lack of long-term follow-up data. See, this is what I mean. First, you have reports that are longitudinal along 2 years, and it's like, oh, people are happy. Oh, well then why aren't there studies along 5 years? Because it hasn't been 5 years yet since this started happening.
Yes, and that's the problem. That's an insane thing to say, right? He's literally just admitting, the reason why there aren't enough studies on this is that this has only been happening for a few years, so we don't have any real evidence about it. And then he's at the same time freaking out because some people are pointing out, hey, we don't really know what's going on here. Insane. He's owned himself there. That's it. That's the self-own that is sufficient for me to be like, yeah, okay, I don't need to do this. Vaush has lost. I mean, I know this isn't a two-way debate, but I'm responding to him. I'm in a position, I'm the arbiter of whether or not this video is complete crap, and it is, because clearly just there, that's it. That's nail in the coffin right there. The fact this whole time he's been like, how could they be saying that there isn't enough evidence? How could they be saying there's any ambiguity around this? How could they be saying this isn't clear? And now he's just like, well, yeah, the reason we don't have any studies for 5 years is because literally this thing is so new that we can't even do studies, substantial studies, covering that period of time. Yeah, Vaush, that's the answer to your question about why people are saying we don't really know anything about what's going on.
Well, we have a pretty good idea of how mRNA vaccines work long-term, but how are we going to know what the long-term effects are going to be if people haven't taken it? That's not a standard you can hold vaccines to. Certainly not for,
Okay, just really quick. Basically, what he was saying there is, how can you possibly do this if you need 20 years of data to say that we should be, that something's safe enough to use? So essentially saying, how can you test the long-term effects of a medical procedure if you require that 20 years of evidence of the long-term effects before you do the medical procedure? To which the obvious answer is, well, we do tests and we do studies. But the other thing is, nobody is necessarily saying that we need to wait for the 20 years of evidence until we do the procedure. We can, I'm not necessarily saying this, but we could continue to go down the trans-affirmation approach, but we should still be willing to talk about the fact that this is actually ambiguous, that we don't fully know what's going on here, right? Because that's, you'll notice at no point during this has anybody said in this article so far, because there is not enough evidence, we should completely abandon, medical transition. That's not been said here yet. So he's adding this on, saying, wow, I can't believe they're saying we should completely ban all medical transition for under 18s until these 20 years worth of studies come out, when that's not even what this article so far is saying. And you might say, well, what else would they be saying? Well, for example, I could say, this isn't what I would really say, but I could say, hey, fine, we'll allow medical transition for anybody experiencing gender dysphoria, but because we don't know the full-time effects, we will put a lot more emphasis on tackling potential sociological issues or causes for this trans identity issue, and put a lot more focus on exploring counseling. Whereas, and then the alternative would be, or if, for example, then 20 years go by and there is really no evidence at all that this has been harmful, that medical transition has been harmful when it has occurred, well, I guess maybe we can ease up on that. That would be a hypothetical position, which I'd say is potentially reasonable, which would both put a focus on the importance of having long-term studies while also not saying that the implementation of medicalization of trans identity needs to be anything close to completely banned. So Vaush is just talking nonsense here by saying, well, how could you possibly have these long-term studies if you're never going to let them happen in the first place? Which nobody's saying that they should never happen in the first place in this article. Some people would be saying that. And I think probably a much more common position might be that they should be banned except for a few trial studies, basically. But yeah.
Determine with any certainty which children and young people will go on to have an enduring trans identity. How would you, the desistance rate, the regret rate is 2% for most.
Yeah, okay. Right. So the point is, it's a really weird thing, right? I'm just remembering, it's such a strange thing to remember. I'm remembering a Lindy Beige video he did about fire arrows, where he was saying that if you fire arrows, let's say if you shoot fire arrows into a town or village, then there have been kind of studies into how effective that would be at setting things on fire. And it found that I think it was actually about 2%. I think it was the exact same statistic, 2% of those arrows, once fired into a city, would set something on fire. So essentially, because obviously, as pretty much anyone knows who's ever tried to start a fire, we have a wood burner in the lounge, in the sitting room. I'd like to think that if there was a complete collapse of society, I wouldn't immediately die. But I've got to admit, even with the modern conveniences of matches, where you can just instantly make a fire, the ability to just set a candle on fire and have a constant source of fire that you can go to, it's pretty difficult to start a fire. And that's why if you shoot a fire arrow into a town or city or village and it makes contact with something, there is only a 2% chance that it will actually turn into a fire that would be any kind of problem for the defenders. But Lindy Beige in this video makes a very good point that the people in the town do not know which 2% are going to start the fire. So, because they don't know which 2% are going to start the fire, they need to run around the entire town getting rid of all these fire arrows, which would use up considerable manpower. So if you were attacking a city, you might fire loads of fire arrows, shoot loads of fire arrows into a city, and then all the defenders have to go and actually clear up those arrows. What I like, though, is the fact that if that city was being, if the garrison of that city was being commanded by Vaush, he would say, well, it doesn't matter that we can't tell which 2% will actually start a fire and burn down the whole city, because it's only 2%. And that's essentially what Vaush is saying here, except instead of it being about a city going up in flames, it's children's entire lives being ruined, their lifespans being, I think, undeniably shortened, having all sorts of, basically becoming chronic medical patients for the rest of their lives. Which I'd argue is a pretty serious issue, when the alternative is them just taking some talking therapy and actually maybe learning to be happy with their bodies. Yeah, to say it doesn't matter that we can't tell which 2% of children will not go on to continue being trans because it's only 2% is an absolutely unhinged and stupid, just logically stupid thing to say.
For most young people, a medical pathway will not be the best way to manage their gender-related distress. This is a signal towards that bullshit study that said that like 90% of young people who are trans don't stay trans. But
okay, you'll notice the issue, right? Because what have you been exploring this whole time? The fact that Vaush is consistently getting upset with these uses of the phrase gender-related distress because he thinks that what they mean is trans people, and they're trying to avoid using the word trans people. But it didn't say, for most young people, a medical pathway will not be the best way to manage their trans identity. It said gender-related distress. And that is obviously true. Because, okay, think about this. Have you ever had gender-related distress? I know I have. I've said this before, when I was a kid, I grew my hair long. The reason I grew my hair long is because I watched the 2001 TV movie Jason and the Argonauts, starring, I can't remember his name. I think the name of the actual guy was Jason, weirdly. Yeah, I watched that movie, and in that movie, Jason had long hair. Of course, also there's the movie Troy, where Brad Pitt had long hair. And I thought, man, having long hair, that's really cool. Like, that's what these, like, really kind of buff swords and sandals movie action heroes have. I want to grow my hair long like them, so I can be like a Greek hero. And I did. But then my sister told me a story about a kid in her year, because my sister's the year above me at school, who had long hair, and a teacher walked up behind him and said, "Excuse me, young lady," and then everyone laughed at him. And I said, all right, in that case, I'm going to cut my hair. So I did. That was gender-related distress, right? What happened there was gender-related distress. There was something I wanted to do, have long hair, but when I heard that actually that could lead to the very embarrassing situation of me being mistaken for a girl, I got my hair cut. That's gender-related distress. Now, here's a question. Would going down a medical pathway have been the best way to manage that gender-related distress? And again, I'm sure if you're a woman, you've had some sort of gender, surely even like as a woman, like just the fear and concern you have about misogyny, about the impact that being a woman could have on your life and on your safety. That is gender-related distress. Would going down a medical pathway be the best way to manage that? No. So this is the issue, right? Vaush this whole time has been freaking out anytime this kind of language has been used of gender-related distress, because he thinks that this study should only be talking about trans people. And therefore he's like, why aren't they just using the word trans all the time? Well, now you can see this creates the obvious issue for him, that he's misunderstood what this is saying. For most young people, a medical pathway will not be the best way to manage their gender-related distress. Well, there are lots of young people with gender-related distress, and many of them don't even go on to identify as trans, so of course it's not the best way to manage, like the medical pathway is not the best way to manage that.
What it actually assessed was cisgender people, and the finding was...
Exactly.
Yeah, did you know, we asked a bunch of cisgender people who, like, I don't know, are a little bit gender nonconforming, how they feel, and then we went on 20 years and saw if they were still trans. And like, because they weren't looking at trans people, or even people who,
like I said, saw if they were still trans. He's so stupid. He can't talk. Nothing he says makes any sense. I'm embarrassed for him.
We have to cure, well, what if you being depressive or anxious is being caused by gender dysphoria? Well, then I guess you're
No, because you're doing both. It very specifically said that you do both at the same time. So that wouldn't screw you over at all, you idiot.
You might just be autistic. Well, how the do you disprove that one? Exactly. You can't cure autism. It can't go away the way depression.
Again, he has this like mentality where it's like everything's about like curing or making things go away, and everything's like absolute in a way which no one's suggesting. I mean, some people are, but certainly not the Cass report. The Cass report isn't suggesting some like absolute ban on treatment for trans identity or anything like that. I've not seen any single person who said we can't provide medical treatment or kind of like medical transition to trans identifying individuals until we cure autism. Nobody said that. So Vaush is very much arguing against a straw man here.
And anxiety theoretically can, though in practice they're usually just symptoms you manage and improve with over time. So I guess if you're autistic, you just can't be trans because...
No one's saying this, Vaush. No one's saying this.
But there are doctors who will see that you're fat and just won't even bother addressing any other medical issue that you have.
Yeah, that's another example. Like, that's a perfect example of how this is legitimate, but being absolute about it is not, right? Like, yes, it is not a good idea to completely ignore medical issues that could otherwise be solved until you've cured or like basically made it so someone is a completely healthy weight, right? Because someone might be a slightly unhealthy weight, but then they actually have a serious problem that needs fixing that can be fixed regardless of their weight. And if you refuse to do that, because you're like, well, you need to fix your weight first, so that's wrong. But at the same time, obviously, we should continue to focus on improving people's overall health, which does mean making sure they stick to a healthy weight. Really very simple.
Notice how this final point right here is literally saying, yeah, we do need innovation and we do need to be able to try new things. Also, like, if you're under 25, you get recommended in childcare, and children shouldn't have access to puberty blockers or hormones. No,
I don't understand what he's saying there. Like, how is that a contradiction? Like, again, is he saying like it's a contradiction to say innovation's good, but also to be like there's some things we shouldn't do? Like, does he genuinely think that's a contradiction?
Nobody would say that if a kid comes in with a broken arm, that thriving and achieving their life goals should be the central concern.
It's a mental health issue, you idiot. How do you not understand it? How do you not understand that we talk about mental health issues in a different way from purely physical issues?
So to imply that the NHS clinical practice might lead these doctors to actually do something is to imply that they should be allowed to provide hormones or puberty blockers, which they don't want.
So what he said there is that basically they're pretending that doctors can't do anything because the only thing they could possibly be able to do is to provide them with these puberty blockers and things like that. But like, imagine if someone said essentially that surgeons can't do anything about mental health issues. Well, yeah, because obviously the only thing a surgeon can do is like cut someone open, and I don't think we would think that cutting people open is the best way to solve a mental health issue. So there's nothing sinister there. Like, yeah, saying that there are certain people, it's not that they can't do something, it's that the thing that they would be doing might not be helpful and might indeed be detrimental. And yeah, there's nothing sinister about that, or nothing kind of, it's not like you're trying to be sneaky with like your language, you're just saying something that's kind of obvious.
Children/young people referred to NHS Gender Services must receive a holistic assessment of their needs, non-statement, to inform an individualized care plan, non-statement. This is obviously the case.
Yeah, so again, I've already kind of mentioned this thing about the non-statements, and I do agree. Yeah, I think a lot of these things from the Cass report, they're not substantial, because again, the problem with the Cass report is it's not sufficiently ideological. You can't be unideological in this. Like, I really don't think you can. I think the only thing you can say is we are ideologically opposed to trans identity, and as such we need to kind of have a model of dealing with this that assumes trans identity is wrong because there's no evidence to think trans identity is correct. Or you go down the other route and say, no, we are ideologically inclined to endorse trans identity, and therefore we're going to weight things in favor of going down that route. I don't really think there's a middle ground. The problem is every middle ground ends up with you just saying nothing statements, right? Like, we should have personal, like what we've just heard there. It's all nothing statements, but the problem is that's the inevitable result of trying to find this middle ground where you're like, well, trans identity is valid and we should respect some people's trans identity and blah, blah, blah. But like, oh, we need to also be mindful of the concerns around this issue as well. It's like, no, you have to recognize that trans identity is itself an entirely nonsense concept.
The gender clinic, unlike every other medical need you might get addressed at the
No, I'm pretty sure any other mental health issue, this could be something to be considered.
NHS, you need to have a full mental health screening and an autism diagnosis check first.
Yeah, different things. You know what's really funny about this? Like 5 seconds ago, he literally said, no doctor disagrees that we should change our attitudes and kind of what, the way we're going to deal with an issue, depending on the specifics of the person. And yet simultaneously, he's now freaking out about the fact that for a different kind of issue, we should treat that differently. So on the one hand, he's like, nobody thinks we shouldn't treat things differently if they're different. And on the other hand, he's like, what? You want to treat this thing differently because it's different? It's kind of hilarious.
All this is going to do is lead young people to hide symptoms of their depression, anxiety, and autism in an effort to get the care they desperately need.
Look, again, he's acting as if anybody said that based on the findings of these screenings, we would deny them what they want. I don't think so. For the record, I really don't think that finding that a gender dysphoric person has mental health issues, anxiety, or autism should be the reason we deny them any given medical transition. Like any example or anything that would be considered medical transition. We shouldn't do that. It should be pretty much irrelevant. The reason we should deny them medical transition is because it's not a good idea to treat a medical issue by validating a delusion. That's the reason we should deny it.
For autism, depression, or anxiety, because they will know that if they do, the gender services clinic will never prescribe them until they're 25.
No, they'll never be prescribed it until they're 25, full stop. Good. I don't know why he's like, again, the fucking pedo. But yeah, that's full stop. Like, he seems to be thinking that these mental health assessments will be relevant, whereas there's no reason to think they will be. These mental health things might just be looking at ways to help them in general, but not in a way that impacts whether or not they would get this medical transition. Again, because if they're lower than 25, they don't get it anyway, right? So it doesn't affect anything. It just gives them more options to be treated better.
Co-occurring conditions, i.e., even though it's a gender clinic, all of a sudden, by the way,
why shouldn't it be holistic? Like, I feel like saying things should be holistic would be another example of one of those nothing statements that he thinks are so obvious, and yet here he's disagreeing with it.
Cass has said, we shouldn't overly stress the workers of the NHS, but now these gender clinicians also need to be managing anxiety, depression, and autism.
I would think they can probably work with specific mental health professionals. Like you can have, I would imagine, for example, if you've got any kind of serious medical issue that, let's say, for example, I know that if you've got cancer, you're likely to have other medical issues that could be kind of brought on by the fact your immune system's going to be weaker. But that doesn't mean the person who's treating you with cancer has to then treat you for all the other medical issues. Like, let's say, for example, if you had cancer and then you got pneumonia, you would then go to a specific person to treat you about that, obviously.
Parents and siblings. Let's make this a whole family event, Let's bring everyone down.
I don't know if he understands this. Gender is very relevant to a family dynamic.
Here, this definitely is an effective and...
Bear in mind, literally in the, what was it called? The Tavistock thing, there were examples of trans or kids who were being kind of told they were trans. I was going to say trans identifying, but they were literally saying oh, I think my parents want this more than I do. There were parents who were saying, oh, one of the reasons we're doing this is because my husband hates the idea of having a gay son. So it's preferable to him to find out that he actually just has a daughter instead. These were literal things that, this investigation found. So, of course, there's a reason to talk to the family.
an efficient way of using the NHS's already overstrained resources and not just an insane wall that we're constructing in order to...
Can I say this? It's interesting that like he's talking about the NHS strained resources when it's about like helping with medical transition. It's pretty clear these people's attitudes just, well, they should just find the resources. But when it's about actually providing safeguarding, he's like, well, they can't do that, or it's unrealistic to think they'll do that because they have strained resources. It's like you have to pick one, right? You can't say, we should give these people this treatment, and who cares about the fact that the NHS has strained resources? We should, reduce waiting times and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't matter that the NHS doesn't have any money. But then when it's like, well, maybe we should have some safeguards and stuff, he's like, no, we shouldn't, because the NHS doesn't have enough money.
I don't think there's anything innately wrong with it, right? Like involving the parents at some level. Like if you've got like a 10-year-old going in for stuff.
So he's literally just he's just admitting that he's wrong, basically. Like he's like, actually, yeah, it turns out this is just a completely standard thing.
Of course, the parents are going to be talked to about stuff, That's fine. When families/carers are making decisions about social transition of prepubertal children, services should ensure they can be seen as early as possible by a clinical professional with relevant experience. That's odd. I think that young people should be seen as quickly as is possible for this kind of care. But why would social transition be a flag that would get you priority screening? That just seems odd to me.
No, okay, so just to clarify, essentially it's talking about if parents want to assist their child in socially transitioning. And again, I'm just saying assist, assuming this is something that's beneficial, which is to say basically, because of course, if you're a parent, you probably are the one who's in charge of your kids getting their haircut, the ones in charge of what your kids wear. It's like that classic line in The Simpsons. Hey, Simpson, nice jammies. Did your mum buy them for you? And then Bart's like, of course she did. Who else would have? But yeah, that's the thing. Like your parents buy your clothes. So ultimately, parents are going to be a big part of how children present themselves. With that said, and again, like one of the problems here is the fact you have gendered parenting in general, which I think is a problem. Like, for example, the fact that you get certain toys for your boy as opposed to your girl. Maybe you even have certain expectations of your boy that you don't have of a girl. That's a problem in itself. But taking it for granted that that is the world we live in, that's going to be another aspect that parents will adjust as part of this social transition, adjust their expectations for their child, who they've perhaps now decided is their daughter instead of their son. Given that this is quite a significant thing to be doing, it's obvious that if this is going to happen, a parent should consult with a professional before they do that. There's nothing particularly strange about that at all, and I don't know why Vaush is pretending to find this really weird. Anyway, we've actually reached the end of our little session. We didn't make that much progress. Again, the thing is with this, you guys don't necessarily even want me to finish it, because both times I've actually responded to this, it's been in the situation where nobody has actually voted for it as their top choice. It's just been the second most voted option. So, maybe it's one of those situations where it would never actually win outright. A bit like the National Front, or I think they're called something else, National Rally in France, where it's like they always, well, they don't always, but they might come second because there's a lot of like very conservative nationalist people in France. But the problem is they'll never win overall because France has a majoritarian system where in order for the National Rally to win, and a lot of people don't understand this thing, some kind of, basically in order for any party to win, over 50% of people have to vote for them. So even though the majority of people in like the first round might vote for the National Rally. I'm going to call them National Front because that's what I'm used to calling them. Might vote for the National Front. When it then gets to the second round and it's like, okay, now we actually need to get a majoritarian winner. So we've established who has the plurality of votes, but we now need somebody to actually get the majority, meaning over 50%. The National Front always loses because it's quite unlikely that any kind of contemporary Western liberal democracy is ever going to reach a point where such far right party as a National Front gets over 50% of the vote. But yeah, so maybe that's what this Vaush video is like. It's going to be one of those things where, you know, there might always be some people who would vote for it such that it's always in second place. I'm always like, oh, I'll vote for this for the second place. But in reality, if I didn't have these moments where I had to go for the second place option, and I always went for the first place option, I would never ever respond to this anyway. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I'm very sorry that I didn't do the vote. I will make an effort to rectify that going forward. And I will see you all next week. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.